Josh and Amanda hated their new house. That much was clear from the moment they set eyes on it. It was big, sure. It looked like a mansion compared to their old place. A tall red brick house with a sloping black roof and rows of windows framed by black shutters. But something about it felt deeply, stubbornly wrong. The whole house seemed to crouch in darkness, hiding in the shadows of gnarled old trees that bent over it like hunched figures. It was the middle of July, but dead brown leaves blanketed the front yard. Tall weeds poked up everywhere. Thick clumps of them had swallowed an old flower bed beside the porch hole. Amanda stood on the street and stared at it. A cold breeze made her shiver, which made no sense. It had been a beautiful, hot summer day just moments before. She was wearing tennis shorts and a sleeveless shirt. But the closer they got to the house, the colder she felt. Josh groaned loudly. Amanda groaned too. Mr. Dawes, the friendly young man from the local real estate office, turned around with his crinkly blue eyes moving from one sibling to the other. Their father explained that the kids weren't happy about moving. Their mother added, with a patient smile, that it was always hard for children, leaving friends behind, starting over somewhere strange. Strange is right, Josh said. This house is gross. Mr. Dawes chuckled and called it an old house that needed some fixing up. Their father pointed out how big it was. Their mother talked about a den and maybe a rec room. But Josh wasn't listening. His mind was already made up. The thing was, Josh and Amanda may have looked alike, both tall and thin, with curly brown hair and dark brown eyes. Everyone said they had serious faces, but Amanda was more patient than her brother, more sensible. Josh was the most impatient kid in the world, and when he made up his mind about something, that was it. He was a little spoiled. Whenever he made a big fuss, he usually got his way, but not this time. This house was theirs, whether Josh liked it or not. It had come to them in a letter. A great uncle of their father's, a man none of them had ever known, had died and left the house to Dad in his will. The town was called Dark Falls, 4 hours from home. Dad had let out a loud whoop when he read that letter and danced around the living room. He had been looking for an excuse to quit his office job and focus on his writing career. A free house was exactly that excuse, and so here they were. A week later, standing on the gravel driveway of a house that looked like it had been waiting in the dark for a very long time, Josh grabbed Dad's hand and tried pulling him back toward the car. Dad snapped at him to stop. Amanda stepped in quietly, grabbing Josh by the shoulder, reminding him that they had both promised to give Dark Falls a chance. Josh said he had already given it a chance and hated it. Dad, embarrassed in front of Mr. Dawes, tried to coax Josh inside by asking if he wanted to pick out his own room. Josh said no. He and Amanda both glanced up at the second floor, where 2 large bay windows sat side by side like a pair of dark, watching eyes. Then Petey lost his mind. Petey was their dog, a white curly-haired terrier, cute and usually well-behaved. He had been left in the car without a fuss many times before, but now he was howling and yapping at full volume, scratching frantically at the car window like something was terrifying him. Josh declared he was letting Petey out and took off down the driveway before anyone could stop him. Petey came charging across the dead leaves, leaping on everyone with wild excitement. And then, without warning, he turned on Mr. Dawes, growling, barking, his small body rigid and trembling with something that looked very much like fear. Their parents apologized. Mr. Dawes said perhaps Petey smelled another dog on him. He loosened his tie and kept a wary eye on the growling animal. Josh scooped Petey up, held him nose to nose, and scolded him. Mr. Dawes was their friend, Josh told him firmly. Petey whimpered, licked Josh's face, and when he was set down, he seemed to let it go. He wandered off to sniff through the yard, nose to the ground. Mr. Dawes unlocked the front door and led them inside. Josh stayed out with Petey. Dad gave up arguing about it inside. Something shifted for Amanda. The house was actually kind of wonderful. So many rooms, so many closets. A finished attic filled with old furniture and stacked mysterious cartons just waiting to be explored. And her own room, was huge and beautiful. It had its own bathroom and an old-fashioned window seat where she could sit and look down at the street. She stood at that window and could see the car in the driveway and a house across the street that looked remarkably like theirs. She was already picturing where she would put her bed, where her desk would go, when she saw the boy. He stood in the doorway for just a second. He had blonde hair. He was not Josh, and then he turned and was gone. Amanda ran to the hallway, calling out, looking in both directions. The long corridor was empty. Every door was closed. She stood there, heart thumping, telling herself to calm down. Then she heard her parents calling from downstairs and hurried back to them. On the stairs she asked Mr. Dawes, almost laughing at herself, whether the house was haunted. He chuckled. The question seemed to amuse him. "No ghost included," he said, smiling with those crinkly blue eyes. He told her that many old houses around Dark Falls were said to be haunted, but this one was not among them. Her mother suggested it was probably just shadows. The trees made the house so dark. Her father told her to go outside and tell Josh what he had missed, maybe cheer him up. Amanda ran out, eager to share what she had seen, ready to convince her stubborn little brother that the house was worth a second look. She called his name across the dead-leaf yard, but Josh and Petey were gone. Josh was gone. That was the terrible fact that hung over everything from the very first moment. The narrator called his name once, then twice, then louder still, running down to the bottom of the driveway and peering into the car, scanning the street in both directions. Nothing, no Josh, no Petey, the dog either. By the time Mom and Dad came hurrying out the front door, alarmed by the shouting, the worry had already taken root and begun to spread. Dad suggested the backyard, and so they ran. The narrator cutting along the side of the house where tall trees leaned in and swallowed the sunlight whole. The backyard opened up into a long rectangle sloping down toward a wooden fence, all of it buried under tall weeds and thick brown leaves. A stone bird bath lay toppled on its side. The garage loomed at the edge of the property. Dark brick matching the house, quiet and still. But no Josh. Dad jogged up, out of breath, and more irritated than frightened, suggesting that Josh had simply thrown a small private tantrum and wandered off on purpose, the way he sometimes did when he didn't get his way. Mom came around to meet them with tightly wound worry written across her face. Mr. Dawes, the real estate agent, locked the front door and stepped down from the porch, pocketing the keys. His calm manner was reassuring. He suggested they drive around the block. He was confident they would find the boy quickly. Then came a small, strange moment. Mr. Dawes opened the trunk of his Honda, tossed in his dark blazer, and pulled out a wide-brimmed black cowboy hat, setting it on his head. Dad noticed it. Mr. Dawes said it kept the sun away, and then they all climbed in and drove. The neighborhood rolled past the windows in a slow procession of old houses, large and quiet, most of them in better shape than the one the family was considering buying. All of them were surrounded by tall leafy trees that threw deep shade across every front yard. The street itself was the only bright place, a narrow golden ribbon cutting through the shadows on either side. No people in the yards, no one on the sidewalks, just an eerie, settled quiet that pressed in from all directions. It was the kind of quiet that made the narrator wonder if the town had always been like this, and whether the name Dark Falls had been chosen for exactly this reason. They circled the block twice without finding him. Mr. Dawes suggested widening the search, and Dad agreed. Mr. Dawes noted with a light laugh that he was new here too and might get turned around, then pointed out a tall red-brick school building with white columns framing the double front doors, old-fashioned and closed for the summer. The fenced playground behind it was empty. Mom's voice went tight and a little higher than usual, as she wondered aloud whether Josh could really have walked this far. Dad answered, in that dry way of his. That Josh never walked anywhere. Josh ran. They turned onto a street marked Cemetery Drive, and there it was, a wide cemetery rising up on a low hill, rows of granite gravestones stretching across the slope and spreading out over a flat plain beyond. There were a few shrubs, but almost no trees, and the narrator noticed with a strange clarity that this was the sunniest place they had seen in all of Dark Falls. The whole town seemed to crouch under shade, but here, among the dead, the sun shone freely. And then Mr. Dawes pointed. He stopped the car suddenly, and there was Josh, running hard through a crooked row of low white gravestones. Mom gasped with relief. The narrator pushed open the car door and stepped onto the grass, calling Josh's name. But Josh didn't stop. He didn't even look up. He kept moving in wild, unpredictable bursts, cutting one way and then another, ducking and weaving between the tombstones like someone playing a frantic, desperate game. The narrator took another few steps and then froze. The relief curdled into something cold and sharp. Josh wasn't playing. The darting, the dodging, the frantic changes in direction, it all made a terrible kind of sense now. Josh wasn't just running through the cemetery. Josh was running from something in it. Something, or someone, was chasing him. Then, as Amanda took a few reluctant steps toward Josh, watching him bend low and change directions with his arms outstretched, she realized she had it completely backward. Josh was not being chased. Josh was chasing. He was chasing after Petey. Okay. So sometimes her imagination ran away with her, running through an old graveyard. Even in bright daylight, it was only natural that a person might start to have weird thoughts. She called to Josh again, and this time he heard her and turned around. He looked worried. "Commander, come help me," he cried. She ran as fast as she could to catch up with him, but he kept darting through the gravestones, moving from row to row. Mom and Dad were right behind her. "It's Petey," Josh explained. Out of breath, "I can't get him to stop. I caught him once, but he pulled away from me." Dad started calling the dog, but Petey was moving from stone to stone, sniffing each one, then running to the next. "How did you get all the way over here?" Dad asked, as he caught up with Josh. "I had to follow Petey," Josh explained, still looking very worried. "He just took off. 1 second he was sniffing around that dead flower bed in our front yard. The next second he just started to run. He wouldn't stop when I called, wouldn't even look back. He kept running till he got here. I had to follow. I was afraid he'd get lost." Josh stopped and gratefully let Dad take over the chase. "I don't know what that dumb dog's problem is," he said to Amanda. "He's just weird. Mind you, it took Dad a few tries, but he finally managed to grab Petey and pick him up off the ground." The little terrier gave a half-hearted yelp of protest, then allowed himself to be carried away. They all trooped back to the car on the side of the road. Mr. Dawes was waiting by the car. "Maybe you better get a leash for that dog," he said, looking very concerned. "Fatty's never been on a leash," Josh protested, wearily climbing into the back seat. "Well, we might have to try one for a while," Dad said quietly, "especially if he keeps running away." He tossed Petey into the back seat. The dog eagerly curled up in Josh's arms. The rest of them piled into the car, and Mr. Dawes drove them back to his office, a tiny white flat-roofed building at the end of a row of small offices. As they rode, Amanda reached over and stroked the back of Petey's head. Why did the dog run away like that, she wondered. Petey had never done that before. She guessed that Petey was also upset about the move. After all, Petey had spent his whole life in their old house. He probably felt a lot like Josh and Amanda did about having to pack up and move and never see the old neighborhood again. The new house, the new streets, and all the new smells must have freaked the poor dog out. Josh wanted to run away from the whole idea, and so did Petey. Mr. Dawes parked the car in front of his tiny office, shook Dad's hand, and gave him a business card. "You can come by next week. We told Mum and Dad. I'll have all the legal work done by then. After you sign the papers, you can move in any time." He pushed open the car door, and giving them all a final smile, prepared to climb out. "Compton Doors," Mom said, reading the white business card over Dad's shoulder. "That's an unusual name. Is Compton an old family name?" Mr. Dawes shook his head. "No, ILO," he said. "I'm the only Compton in my family. I have no idea where the name comes from. No idea at all. Maybe my parents didn't know how to spell Charlie." Chuckling at his terrible joke, he climbed out of the car, lowered the wide black Stetson hat on his head, pulled his blazer from the trunk, and disappeared into the small white building. Dad climbed behind the wheel, and they started the long drive home. "I guess you and Petey had quite an adventure today," my mum said to Josh. "I guess," Josh said without enthusiasm. Petey was sound asleep in his lap, snoring quietly. "Wine, you're going to love your room," Inanda told Josh. "The whole house is great, really." Wine Josh stared at her thoughtfully, but did not answer. She poked him in the ribs with her elbow. "She say something. Did you hear what I said?" But the weird, thoughtful look did not fade from his face. The next couple of weeks seemed to crawl by. Amanda walked around the house thinking about how she would never see her room again, how she would never eat breakfast in that kitchen again, how she would never watch TV in the living room again. Morbid stuff like that. She had a sick feeling when the movers came one afternoon and delivered a tall stack of cartons. Time to pack up. It was really happening. Even though it was the middle of the afternoon, she went up to her room and flopped down on her bed. She did not nap or anything. She just stared at the ceiling for more than an hour. And all these wild, unconnected thoughts ran through her head like a dream, only she was awake. She was not the only one who was nervous about the move. Mom and Dad were snapping at each other over nothing at all. One morning they had a big fight over whether the bacon was too crispy or not. In a way, it was funny to see them being so childish. Josh was acting really sullen all the time. He hardly spoke a word to anyone, and Petey sulked too. That dumb dog would not even pick himself up and come over to Amanda when she had some table scraps for him. The hardest part about moving was saying goodbye to friends. Carol and Amy were away at camp, so Amanda had to write to them, but Kathy was home, and she was Amanda's oldest and best friend, and the hardest to say goodbye to. Some people were probably surprised that Kathy and Amanda had stayed such good friends. For one thing, they looked so different. Amanda was tall and thin and dark, and Kathy was fair-skinned, with long blonde hair and a little chubby. But they had been friends since preschool and best friends since 4th grade. When Kathy came over the night before the move, they were both terribly awkward. "Kathy, you shouldn't be nervous," Amanda told her. "You're not the one who's moving away forever. It's not like you're moving to China or something." Sighed Kathy answered, chewing hard on her bubble gum. "Dark Falls is only 4 hours away, Amanda. We'll see each other a lot." "Yeah, I guess Amanda said, but she did not believe it. 4 hours away was as bad as being in China, as far as she was concerned. "I guess we can still talk on the phone," Hoshi said glumly. Kathy blew a small green bubble, then sucked it back into her mouth. Yeah, sure," she said, pretending to be enthusiastic. "You're lucky, you know, moving out of this crummy neighborhood to a big house." "It's not a crummy neighborhood," Amanda insisted, though she was not sure why she was defending it. One of their favorite pastimes used to be thinking of places they would rather be growing up. "High school won't be the same without you," Kathy sighed, curling her legs under her on the chair. "Who's going to slip me the answers in math?" Amanda laughed. "I always slipped you the wrong answers." "Fine, but it was the thought that counted," Kathy said, and then she groaned. "Of junior high. Is your new junior high part of the high school or part of the elementary school?" Amanda made a disgusted face. "Everything's in one building. It's a small town, remember? There's no separate high school, at least. I didn't see one. Fine bummer." Kathy said they chatted for hours until Kathy's mum called and said it was time for her to come home. Then they hugged. Amanda had made up her mind that she would not cry, but she could feel the big hot tears forming in the corners of her eyes, and then they were running down her cheeks. "I'm so miserable. Why?" she wailed. She had planned to be really controlled and mature, but Kathy was her best friend after all, and what could she do? They made a promise that they would always be together on their birthdays, no matter what. They would force their parents to make sure they did not miss each other's birthdays, and then they hugged again, and Kathy said, "Fine, don't worry, we'll see each other a lot, really." And she had tears in her eyes, too. She turned and ran out the door. The screen door slammed hard behind her. Amanda stood there, staring out into the darkness, until Petey came scampering in, his toenails clicking across the linoleum, and started to lick her hand. The next morning, moving day, was a rainy Saturday. Not a downpour, no thunder or lightning, but just enough rain and wind to make the long drive slow and unpleasant. The sky seemed to get darker as they neared the new neighborhood. The heavy trees bent low over the street. "Size low down, Jack," Mom warned shrilly. "The street is really slick." But Dad was in a hurry to get to the house before the moving van did. Josh, beside Amanda in the back seat, was being a real pain, as usual. He kept complaining that he was thirsty, then that he was starving, though they had all had a big breakfast. He just wanted attention. Amanda kept trying to cheer him up by telling him how great the house was inside and how big his room was. He still had not seen it, but he did not want to be cheered up. He started wrestling with Petey, getting the poor dog all worked up, until Dad had to shout at him to stop. "Let's all try really hard not to get on each other's nerves," Mom suggested. Dad laughed. "Good idea, dear. Dear, don't make fun of me," she snapped. They started to argue about who was more exhausted from all the packing. Petey stood up on his hind legs and started to howl at the back window. "Can't you shut him up?" "Found you." Mom screamed. Amanda pulled Petey down, but he struggled back up and started howling again. Would he's never done this before? "Reset," she said. "Just get him quiet." Mom insisted. Amanda pulled Petey down by his hind legs, and Josh started to howl. Mom turned around and gave him a dirty look. Josh did not stop howling, though. He thought it was a riot. Finally, Dad pulled the car up the driveway of the new house. The tires crunched over the wet gravel. Rain pounded on the roof. "Home sweet home," Mom said. Amanda could not tell if she was being sarcastic or not. She thought Mom was really just glad the long car ride was over. "At least we beat the movers." "Son," Dad said, glancing at his watch. Then his expression changed. "Hope they're not lost. It's as dark as night out there." Josh complained. Petey was jumping up and down in Amanda's lap, desperate to get out of the car. He was usually a good traveler, but once the car stopped, he wanted out immediately. Amanda opened her car door, and he leaped onto the driveway with a splash and started to run in a wild zigzag across the front yard. "At least someone's glad to be here." Josh said quietly. Dad ran up to the porch and, fumbling with the unfamiliar keys, managed to get the front door open. Then he motioned for them to come into the house. Mom and Josh ran across the walk, eager to get in out of the rain. Amanda closed the car door behind her and started to jog after them. But something caught her eye. She stopped and looked up to the twin bay windows above the porch. She held a hand over her eyebrows to shield her eyes and squinted through the rain. Yes, she saw it. A face. In the window on the left, the boy. The same boy was up there, staring down at her. "Wipe your feet. Don't track mud on the nice clean floors." That was how it began. Mom's voice bouncing off the bare walls of an empty house on a rainy, miserable moving day. And somewhere in that house, a boy was watching from an upstairs window. Amanda had seen him. She was sure of it. A face staring down at her from the second floor before she had even stepped inside. The house smelled of fresh paint, the painters having only just finished on Thursday, and the air inside was sweltering, far hotter than the wet afternoon outside. Dad was already hollering from the back of the house. about a kitchen light that wouldn't turn on. And Mom was at the living room window, staring out at the rain, watching for the movers who hadn't arrived yet. When Amanda told her what she had seen, Mom rolled her eyes. She said it was a reflection, a tree probably. Josh, Amanda's brother, laughed it off too, cracking a joke about whether someone was already living there before wandering off to explore on his own. But Amanda was not laughing. She had seen a face, a real face, and she was angry that no one would believe her. She did what stubbornness and curiosity demanded she do. She ran to the foot of the stairs, cupped her hands around her mouth, and shouted up into the dark second floor. "Who's up there?" No answer came back. She called again, louder. Mom winced with her hands over her ears, but Amanda was already climbing, her sneakers thudding on the bare wooden steps. She told herself she wasn't scared, not until she reached the landing. That was when the heavy feeling settled into the pit of her stomach, the kind that tells you to stop and think. A burglar, maybe, or some bored neighborhood kid looking for a thrill in an empty house. Maybe the boy was dangerous. The thought sent a tremor into her voice as she called out again from the top of the stairs. Then she heard it. Footsteps scampering across the hallway. Or, no, she stopped herself. It was the rain, pattering against the slate-shingled roof. That small realization steadied her just enough to let go of the banister and step into the long, narrow hallway. Except for a rectangle of grey light from a small window at the far end, it was dark up here. She tried a light switch on the wall near the first door. Nothing happened. The electricity was out up here, same as the kitchen downstairs. Her hand was trembling when she grabbed the first doorknob. It felt warm and damp in her grip. She pushed the door open, stepped into the room, waited for lightning to flash and show her every corner. No one. Just the grey bay window and the darkening sky outside, black as midnight, even though it was barely past lunchtime. She backed into the hall and moved toward the next room. Her room. The one with the bay window that looked straight down onto the front yard. The room where the boy had been standing when he looked down at her. She stopped outside the closed door. Even now she was cautious enough to knock first. She called out, "Who's in there?" and stood still in the hot, paint-thick air, listening. A clap of thunder broke closer than the last, and she froze as though the sound had turned her to stone. Then she reached for the knob, asked one more time if anybody was in there, and started to turn it. That was when the hand grabbed her shoulder from behind. Amanda could not breathe. She could not cry out. Her heart seemed to stop, and her chest felt as if it were about to explode. With a desperate, terrified effort, she spun around and shrieked at the top of her lungs. It was Josh, just Josh, her brother, laughing that high-pitched laugh of his that echoed down the long bare hallway. He had grabbed her from behind, and now he stepped back, declared he had gotten her, and rolled around on the floor in absolute delight. Amanda's heart was pounding hard. Her forehead throbbed. She shoved him against the wall and told him he was not funny, that he had really scared her. But Josh just kept laughing and rolling around like the sicko he was. She turned away from him in anger, and that is when she saw it. Her bedroom door was slowly swinging open on its own. Amanda gasped and froze, staring at the moving door. Josh stopped laughing instantly and stood up, his dark eyes wide with fright. From inside the room came sounds that stopped them both cold. Someone moving, whispering, excited giggles. Amanda stammered out a question in a high little voice she did not even recognize as her own. The door creaked like something out of a haunted house movie, opened a bit more, then began to close again. She demanded to know who was there, more forcefully this time. But the only answer was more whispering and the soft sounds of movement. Josh had backed himself against the wall and was edging toward the stairs, his face twisted in sheer terror, a look Amanda had never seen on him before. He was staring at her and violently motioning with his hand for her to follow him and run. But Amanda did not run. Instead, she stepped forward, grabbed the doorknob, and shoved the door open hard. It did not resist at all. She stood in the doorway and called out one final time. The room was empty. Thunder crashed outside. It took her a moment to understand. The window on the opposite wall had been left open several inches. The gusting wind was what had been pushing the door back and forth, and the sounds she had mistaken for whispers. Those had just been the wind too. The painters must have left the window open. Amanda took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and walked to the window to push it shut. Feeling just a little foolish, from the hallway, Josh whispered her name, asking if she was all right. And right then something shifted in Amanda. He had nearly scared her to death just minutes ago. He deserved exactly what was coming to him. So she said nothing. She heard him take a few timid steps closer. She tiptoed to her closet, pulled the door open about a third of the way, then laid herself flat on her back on the floor, with her head and shoulders hidden inside the closet, and the rest of her stretched out in plain view of the doorway. The lightning was flashing impressively, and thunder was cracking outside the old window. It was a perfect scene. She took a deep breath and held it so she would not giggle. Josh whispered her name again, and then he must have seen her sprawled there on the dark floor. Because he let out a loud noise of alarm, he gasped, and then he screamed at the top of his lungs. Amanda heard him running full speed down the hall, shrieking for their mum and dad, his sneakers thudding hard on the wooden stairs all the way down, his voice rising and carrying through the whole house. Amanda snickered to herself on the floor, but before she could even pull herself up, something warm and rough found her face, a tongue, licking her cheeks, licking her eyelids, licking her frantically over and over, as if trying to bring her back to life. It was Petey, sweet, nervous Petey, who had clearly been as wound up as everyone else in this strange new place. Amanda laughed and threw her arms around the dog, begging him to stop, telling him he was getting her all sticky, but Petey would not stop. He kept right on licking with everything he had. The poor dog was nervous too, Amanda thought. She held his panting face away with both hands and spoke to him gently. She told him there was nothing to be nervous about, that this new place was going to be fun. He would see. She almost seemed to be saying it as much for herself as for the dog. That night, Amanda fell into bed with a grin still playing on her lips. She was replaying the look on Josh's face from that afternoon, the pure terror in his eyes when he thought something horrible had happened to her, and then the hot flush of anger when he realized she had fooled him completely. It was delicious, but Mom and Dad were in no mood for laughter. The moving van had shown up an hour late, and both of them were frazzled and short-tempered. They sat Josh and Amanda down and made them shake on it. No more scaring each other. Josh muttered under his breath that it was hard not to get scared in a creepy old place like this, but they both reluctantly agreed to call a truce if they could possibly help it. The movers came in out of the rain, grumbling, and began hauling furniture through the front door. Josh and Amanda helped direct traffic, pointing to rooms and corners, trying to stay useful without getting in the way. The men dropped Amanda's dresser on the stairs, leaving a small scratch, and the whole operation had the feel of organized chaos. By the end of the day, all the furniture was in, but it looked wrong somehow, strange and small inside those tall, wide rooms, like toys left behind in an enormous, empty hall. Mom had managed to hang curtains in Amanda's room, which helped a little, but the walls were bare, the posters still rolled up and waiting, and the whole space felt foreign. A little after 10 o'clock, Amanda climbed into her old familiar bed and discovered that it was no comfort at all. Everything felt off. The bed faced the wrong direction. The shadows in the corners were darker than she remembered shadows being. Her back started to itch, and then she felt itchy all over, her mind leaping immediately to the wild thought that the mattress was crawling with bugs. She knew it was ridiculous. Same old bed, clean sheets. But that was the kind of place this house was. It made perfectly reasonable people think unreasonable things. She pressed her face into the pillow and started counting by twos, watching the numbers roll past in her mind the way she always did when sleep refused to come. It usually worked. That night it did not. She was still wide awake at 2:20 in the morning, staring at the ceiling. Eventually, without realizing it, she drifted off. It was a light, restless sleep, the kind that barely counts. Then something yanked her back to consciousness, and she sat straight up, heart hammering. Despite the warmth of the room, she felt cold all over. She looked toward the foot of the bed and saw that she had kicked off her sheet and blanket in her sleep. She reached down to pull them back and then froze. There were whispers in the room, soft, insistent whispers coming from somewhere across the darkness. "Who is there? Why?" Her voice came out tiny and trembling, barely a whisper itself. She grabbed the covers and pulled them up to her chin, eyes straining to make sense of the dim room. And then slowly things came into focus. The curtains, her long sheer curtains, the ones her mother had hung just that afternoon, were billowing at the window, fluttering and sighing like something alive. That was the whispering, the curtains. Amanda let out a long breath, feeling slightly foolish. She climbed out of bed and crept across the cold wooden floor to close the window. As she got close, the curtains stilled and floated gently back into place. She pushed them aside and reached for the window latch. It was already closed. Amanda stood there for a long moment, staring out at the grey night beyond the glass. The window was shut tight. There was no draught, no explanation at all for why those curtains had been moving the way they had. She stood still, searching for a rational answer, and found none. Had she imagined it? Were her eyes still half asleep? She forced herself back to bed and pulled the covers up as high as they would go. "Amanda, stop scaring yourself," she whispered. "It was the kind of thing you say when you know, deep down, that the fear is not entirely coming from inside you." When she finally fell back to sleep, the dream that met her was the ugliest thing her mind had ever made. She dreamed that they were all dead, her mother, her father, Josh, and herself. She saw them first sitting around the dining room table in the new house, the room blazing with a strange, harsh light that made their faces hard to see. Then, slowly, the brightness faded, and she could see them clearly. Beneath their hair, where their faces should have been, there was nothing but grey-green skulls. Shreds of flesh clung to the cheekbones. Where the eyes had been, there were only deep black sockets. The four of them sat in silence, eating. Amanda looked down at her plate and saw that it was filled with small bones. A great platter in the center of the table was heaped high with more of them, grey-green and human-looking. Then came the pounding, a loud, furious knocking at the front door that grew louder and louder until it shook the walls. Amanda could see through the dream that it was Kathy, her best friend from back home, hammering on the door with both fists, desperate to get in. Amanda wanted more than anything to go to her. She wanted to run to that door and pull it open and tell Kathy everything, to explain what had happened, to say goodbye or hello or something. The longing was enormous and aching, but she could not get up from the table. No matter how hard she tried, she was stuck there, frozen in her seat, picking up bones from her plate with her skeletal fingers. The pounding grew deafening. She woke up gasping, the horror of the dream clinging to her like a cold, wet cloth. She could still hear the pounding echoing in her ears. She shook her head hard, trying to clear it. Morning had come. The sky outside was blue and pale. Amanda sat up and pressed a hand to her chest, steadying herself. Then she saw the curtains. They were billowing again, flapping and snapping as they blew into the room. She stared at them, and the cold crept back over her skin. The window was still closed. The house on Dark Falls had barely let the family sleep, and already it was asking questions none of them could answer. At the breakfast table, Amanda tried again to convince her parents that something was deeply wrong. The curtains had blown like wild things in the night, she insisted, even though the window was shut tight. She still felt the fear of it clinging to her like cold air. Her father, steady and practical, suggested a missing pane of glass, something sensible and fixable. Her brother Josh cracked a joke about Amanda being a pain, because that was the kind of boy Josh was, always ready with the wrong words at the wrong moment. Their mother shut it down quickly, but she looked worn through, her black hair falling loose from where she usually kept it pinned, her bathrobe belt tugged half-heartedly. She had not slept either. Amanda told them about lying awake, waiting for the boy to reappear in her room. She had seen him before, this strange boy, and the memory of him would not leave her alone. Her mother did not want to hear it. She told Amanda firmly, almost sharply, that her nerves were getting the better of her, that her imagination was running wild. Josh could not help himself and let out a ghostly wail, arms raised, until their mother pressed a hand to his shoulder and reminded him of what he had promised about frightening his sister. Their father tried a gentler approach. He suggested Amanda might have dreamed the whole thing, since she had already admitted to nightmares. At those words, the nightmare rushed back into her mind unbidden, the platter piled with bones. She shivered and said nothing more about it. Their mother mentioned the dampness of the house, and their father said sunshine would help. Though when Amanda looked out the window, the sky had gone the color of ash. The trees in the backyard seemed to pull the darkness closer, rather than let any light through. The dog Petey was already out there somewhere. He had not slept well either. Apparently, the plan for the day was laid out simply enough. The parents had unpacking to do, towers of sealed cartons crowding the back hallway. The children were told to go explore the neighborhood, find out what was around, maybe discover whether any other kids their age lived nearby. Amanda made a joke about being told to get lost, and both parents laughed, because it was close enough to the truth to be funny. Then Josh started. He wanted to unpack his things. He wanted his bike. His tire was flat, his father told him, and the bikes were buried too deep in the garage to reach. Josh crossed his arms and announced he would not go at all. So the parents argued with him, then threatened him, and finally he agreed to go for what he called a short walk, in the tone of someone making a great personal sacrifice. Amanda finished her breakfast quietly, her thoughts drifting to Kathy and the friends she had left behind. She wondered what the children of Dark Falls would be like. She wondered if real friendship was something she could find here. She volunteered to wash the breakfast dishes while her parents worked, and she meant it genuinely. The warm water settling over her hands felt like a small comfort, and she did not mind admitting, even to herself, that she found peace in simple tasks like this. Behind her, from somewhere in the front of the house, she could hear Josh and her father going back and forth about a basketball buried in one of the cartons. Her father's patience was thinning. His voice carried the clear message that finding a basketball was not, at this particular moment, anywhere near the top of his concerns. Amanda stacked the last dish to drain and went looking for a dish towel. There was none to be found, not yet unpacked. She wiped her hands on the front of her robe and started toward the stairs. She called out to Josh that she would be dressed in 5 minutes, that they could leave after that. Then she stepped onto the first stair and looked up. On the landing above her stood a girl she had never seen before. She looked about Amanda's age, with short black hair, and she was smiling down at her. It was not a warm smile. It was not friendly in any way that comfort could be taken from. It was the coldest smile Amanda had ever seen, and it stopped her completely on the stairs, frozen between the life of the house below and whatever was waiting for her above. A hand on her shoulder made Amanda spin around, heart lurching, only to find Josh standing there with that familiar stubborn look on his face. He wasn't going anywhere without his basketball. But Amanda barely heard him. Her eyes were fixed on the landing above, where, just a moment before, a girl had been standing and smiling down at her. Now the girl was gone, and Amanda's legs were trembling so badly she had to grab the banister. She called for her father, her voice tight with fear. Dad appeared at the foot of the stairs, already sweaty from the work of unpacking, and when Amanda told him what she'd seen, he did what parents so often do. He looked right past her fear and found the practical explanation. He pointed up to the landing, where a pile of Amanda's own clothes sat in a heap. Mom must have unpacked them while they were talking. Just clothes, he said, rolling his eyes. Not a girl, just clothes. Amanda said she was sorry. She said it twice on the way up the stairs, but she didn't feel sorry. She felt confused, and she still felt scared, and no matter how many times she turned the question over in her mind, she could not convince herself that she had mistaken a pile of laundry for a smiling girl. She had good eyesight. She wasn't crazy. So what was happening to her? She pushed open the door to her room and found the curtains billowing again in front of the bay window. The window was open this time, letting in warm, wet air, and the heavy smell of rain from a grey and threatening sky. She crossed the room to check it, and when she turned around she had another shock waiting for her. Someone had laid out an outfit on her bed, a pair of faded jeans and a pale blue sleeveless t-shirt, spread out neatly side by side at the foot of the mattress, as though an invisible person had arranged them there. Amanda called out to her mother, but the answer that floated up from downstairs was too muffled to understand. She told herself to calm down. Mom had pulled out the clothes, of course she had. There was a logical explanation for all of it. There had to be. She was so determined to believe this that she repeated the word logical over and over in her mind as she pulled on her jeans until the word stopped sounding like anything real at all. And then, just as she was steadying herself, she heard it, whispering from inside the closet, whispering and hushed giggling right behind the closed door. That was the last straw. Amanda threw the closet door open and shoved clothes aside with both hands, fully expecting to find someone crouching there. But the closet was empty, nothing inside but her things. Could it have been mice? Could all of this, every strange and creeping moment, be nothing more than mice and shadows and her own rattled nerves? She said it out loud. She needed to get out of there. And just as she finished the thought, Josh popped up in the doorway and shouted boo. She snapped at him, though she hadn't meant to sound so sharp. But when Josh said that this place gave him the creeps too, Amanda stopped short. She pushed him to explain, and what came out surprised her. Josh had a dream the night before. 2 boys in his room, he said. Mean boys. He couldn't remember exactly what they did, only that they frightened him. They hadn't spoken to him. They had just laughed. Well, giggled, he admitted, looking embarrassed. He clearly didn't want to talk about it anymore, so he redirected the conversation toward the walk they had promised to take together, and Amanda let him. As they headed down the hall, Amanda passed the pile of clothes on the landing and felt the whole strange morning pressing in on her. The girl on the landing, the boy she had glimpsed in the window when they first arrived, and now the 2 giggling boys in Josh's dream. She turned it all over in her mind and landed, slowly and deliberately, on the most reasonable conclusion she could find. Both she and Josh were nervous about the move. They were wound tight, reading danger into every shadow and strangeness into every sound. Their parents had said as much. Maybe they were right. Their imaginations were running away with them. It had to be that. What else could it possibly be? A few seconds after stepping back inside, Amanda and Josh headed into the backyard to get Petey. The little dog was as glad to see them as ever, leaping up with muddy paws, yapping excitedly, running in frantic circles through the leaves. Just seeing him lifted Amanda's spirits. The air outside was hot and muggy, despite the grey sky. There was no wind at all. The heavy old trees stood as still as statues. They headed down the gravel driveway toward the street, their sneakers kicking through the dead brown leaves. Petey zigzagging at their sides, first darting ahead, then falling behind. At least Dad hasn't asked us to rake all these old leaves, Josh said. He will, I foresight he, Amanda warned. I don't think he's unpacked the rake yet. Why, Josh made a face. They stood at the curb, looking back up at the house. The 2 second-floor bay windows stared back at them like a pair of dark eyes. For the first time, Amanda noticed the house next door. It was about the same size as theirs, except it was shingle instead of brick. The living room curtains were drawn shut. Some of the upstairs windows were shuttered. Tall trees cast that house in shadow too, giving it the same closed, secretive feeling as their own. Which way? whined Josh asked, tossing a stick for Petey to chase. Amanda pointed up the street. "A school is up that way. Let's check it out." The road sloped uphill. Josh picked up a small tree branch from the side of the road and used it as a walking stick. Petey kept trying to chew on it as Josh walked. They passed front yard after front yard without seeing a single person. No cars went by either. Amanda was beginning to think the whole town was deserted. Then the boy stepped out from behind a low ledge. He appeared so suddenly that both Amanda and Josh stopped in their tracks. "Higher, higher," he said shyly, giving them a little wave. "Higher, higher," they answered together. Before either of them could grab him, Petey ran straight up to the boy, sniffed his sneakers, and began snarling and barking. The boy stepped back and raised his hands as if he were protecting himself. He looked genuinely frightened. "Why, Petey, stop!" Amanda cried. Josh grabbed the dog and lifted him, but Petey kept growling. "Hyphy doesn't bite," Amanda told the boy. "Hyphy usually doesn't bark either. I'm sorry. Hive, that's okay." "That's okay," the boy said, still watching Petey squirm in Josh's arms. "He probably smells something on me." Amanda studied the boy. He had short, wavy blonde hair and very pale blue eyes, with a funny turned-up nose that looked out of place on his serious face. Despite the muggy heat, he was wearing a maroon long-sleeved sweatshirt and black straight-leg jeans, with a blue baseball cap stuffed into his back pocket. "I'm Amanda Benson," she said, "and this is my brother Josh." Josh hesitantly set Petey back down. The dog yipped once, stared up at the boy, whimpered softly, and then sat down on the street and began scratching himself. "I'm Ray Thurston," the boy said, stuffing his hands into his jeans pockets, still watching Petey with wariness. He relaxed a little once the dog lost interest in barking. Then Amanda realized with a jolt that Ray looked familiar. She stared hard at him, reaching back through her memory, and then she gasped. Ray was the boy in her room, the boy in the window. "You were in our house," she stammered accusingly. He looked confused. You were in my room, right?" she pressed. He laughed. "In your room? I don't get it." Why, Petey raised his head, gave a low growl in Ray's direction, then went back to his scratching. Amanda felt her certainty begin to waver. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe she had been wrong. "I thought I saw you," she said uncertainly. "I haven't been in your house in a long time," Ray replied. "I still on the dog for a long time." "Why long time?" "Huria. I used to live in your house," she said simply. Josh and Amanda stared at him. "Our house?" Ray nodded. "When we first moved here, he said, picking up a flat pebble and heaving it down the street. Petey growled, started to chase it, changed his mind, and plopped back down with his stub of a tail wagging. Heavy clouds lowered across the sky, and it seemed to grow darker. "Where do you live now?" Amanda asked. Ray tossed another stone and pointed up the road. "Did you like our house?" Fine, Josh asked. "Fun, yeah. It was okay," Ray said. "Funnish and shady. You liked it." Fun, Josh cried. "I think it's gross. It's so dark." But Petey interrupted, deciding to start barking at Ray again, running up until he was just a few inches away, then backing off. Ray retreated cautiously to the edge of the curb. Josh pulled the leash from his pocket. "Orchery, Petey," he muttered. Amanda held the growling dog while Josh clipped the leash onto his collar. The leash seemed to confuse Petey. He tugged against it, pulling Josh across the street, but at least the barking stopped. "Let's do something," Josh said impatiently. "Like what?" Ray asked, relaxing again now that Petey was restrained. They all thought for a moment. "Maybe we could go to your house," Josh suggested. Ray shook his head. "No, not now anyway." "Why, where is everyone?" Amanda asked, glancing up and down the empty street. "It's really dead around here." Ray chuckled softly. Yeah, I guess you could say that." He suggested the playground behind the school, and the three of them headed up the street, Ray leading the way, Josh gripping his tree branch in one hand and the leash in the other, while Petey yanked this way and that, giving him a hard time. They didn't see the group of kids until they turned the corner. There were 10 or 12 of them, mostly boys, but with a few girls too, laughing and shouting, shoving each other playfully as they came down the center of the street. Some were about Amanda's age, the rest were teenagers. They wore jeans and dark t-shirts. One girl stood out because she had long straight blonde hair and was wearing green spandex tights. "Hey, look," a tall boy with slicked back black hair called out, pointing at them. Seeing Ray, Josh, and Amanda, the group grew quiet, but kept moving forward. A few of them giggled, as if sharing some private joke. The three stopped and watched them approach. Amanda smiled, ready to say hi. Petey barked his head off. "I fool. Hi, guys," the tall boy with the black hair, said, grinning. The others seemed to find this very funny. They laughed. The girl in the green tights shoved a short, red-haired boy so hard he nearly stumbled into Amanda. "How's it going, Ray?" A girl with short black hair asked. "Not bad. Hi, guys." "Guys," Ray answered. He turned to Amanda and Josh. "These are some of my friends. They're all from the neighborhood. Shanghai," Amanda said, feeling awkward, wishing Petey would stop pulling and barking, while poor Josh struggled to hold him. Ray went around the circle introducing everyone. George Carpenter, Jerry Franklin, Karen Somerset, Bill Gregory. The names came too fast to hold on to. "How do you like Dark Falls?" Sifty, one of the girls, asked. "I don't really know," Ibana said. "It's my first day here, really. It seems nice." Some of the kids laughed at her answer, though she couldn't understand why. George Carpenter crouched down and stared hard at Petey, studying the dog as though he had never seen anything quite like him before. Then Karen Somerset, a tall, pretty girl with short blonde hair, stepped close to Amanda. "You know, I used to live in your house," she said softly. Amanda froze. What? Before she could ask Karen to repeat herself, Ray cut in. "Let's go to the playground." No one responded. The group went quiet. Even Petey stopped barking. Had Karen really just said that? Amanda wanted to ask, but Karen had already stepped back into the circle of kids. The circle. Amanda's mouth went dry as she realized what had happened. They had formed a circle around her and Josh. A slow, cold stab of fear moved through her. Was she imagining it? But no, their faces had changed. They were still smiling, but the smiles had gone tight and watchful, as though they were expecting something to happen. Two of them, she noticed now, were carrying baseball bats. The girl in the green spandex tights stared at Amanda, looking her up and down. No one said a word. The street had gone completely silent except for Petey, who was now whimpering softly. Amanda turned to Ray. He was still standing beside her, but did not return her gaze. She looked over at Josh. He was busy soothing Petey, and had not yet noticed that everything had changed. "Hey, guys," Amanda said, trying to keep her voice steady even as it trembled slightly. "What's going on? What's going on?" The two boys with bats raised them to waist height and stepped forward. The circle tightened. The kids were closing in. The black clouds overhead seemed to press down lower and lower, and the air hung heavy and damp around Amanda and Josh as the circle of neighborhood kids began to close in. Josh was still fussing with Petey's collar, completely unaware. Amanda held her breath, watching Ray stand frozen and expressionless beside her, making no move to help. The circle grew tighter. She took a deep breath and opened her mouth to cry out. Then a voice cut through the tension. "Hey kids, what's going on?" It was Mr. Dawes, crossing the street in long, easy strides, his open blazer flapping behind him, a friendly smile already on his face. He asked again what was happening, seemingly blind to the fact that a ring of children had been quietly surrounding two of their own. George Carpenter twirled his bat and told Mr. Dawes they were heading to the playground to play softball. Mr. Dawes tugged his striped tie back into place. glanced at the darkening sky, and wished them luck against the rain. Just like that, the circle dissolved. The kids broke apart into small chatting clusters, and the mood lifted as though nothing had ever been wrong. Mr. Dawes paused, and his eyes went wide with a warm sort of surprise. He had not even noticed Amanda and Josh standing there. He greeted them with genuine friendliness, and Petey immediately began barking and pulling at the leash. Mr. Dawes put on an exaggerated wounded expression and told the dog to lighten up. Amanda apologized and explained that Petey had not seemed to like anyone that morning. Mr. Dawes shrugged it off with good humor, told them he was heading over to help their parents settle in, and climbed back into his car and drove away. Ray said Mr. Dawes was a nice guy. Amanda agreed, though her eyes were still trailing after the departing car, still wondering what might have happened if he had not shown up when he did. But the kids were already walking toward the playground, laughing and teasing one another, paying Amanda and Josh almost no attention at all. And standing there in the freshening air, Amanda began to feel a little silly. Had she imagined the whole thing? Ray and Josh had not noticed anything strange. She told herself she must have built it all up in her overactive mind. At least, she consoled herself, she had not screamed or made a scene. At least she had not made a complete fool of herself. The playground behind the school was a wide, flat, grassy field, surrounded on all sides by a tall metal fence. Swings and slides sat near the school building, and two softball diamonds stretched out at the far end. Beyond the fence, a row of tennis courts sat empty and silent. Josh tied Petey to the fence and ran to join the others. A boy named Jerry Franklin sorted everyone into teams. Amanda found herself playing right field, which suited her fine since she knew her fielding was not exactly her strongest skill, but she could hit, and when her turn at bat came, she sent the ball sailing into a clean double. She messed up only one play in the field. 2 full innings went by, and though her team trailed 8-2, Amanda was having a genuinely good time. There was a girl named Karen Somerset who sat beside Amanda while they waited to bat. Karen had a wide, bright smile tucked behind a full set of braces, and she was warm and eager, and seemed to truly want to be friends. The clouds were parting by then. The sun was beginning to find its way through, and Amanda felt something ease inside her chest. Then a sharp silver whistle split the air. Jerry Franklin called everyone in and announced they had all promised their families they would be home for lunch. Amanda checked her watch. It was only 11:30, still early, but not a single kid protested. They waved their goodbyes and took off running, moving with a speed and urgency that felt almost strange, as though they were racing some invisible clock. Karen ran past Amanda with her head down and a focused expression, then stopped and turned back. She called out that it had been nice meeting Amanda and suggested they get together sometime. Amanda called back, asking if Karen knew where she lived. She could barely hear the answer over the wind and the distance. Karen nodded, and what Amanda thought she heard was that, yes, Karen knew the house, that she had once lived there herself. But that could not have been what she said, could it? Several days had passed since Amanda and Josh moved to Dark Falls, and life was slowly finding its new shape. The kids at the playground were warming up to them, letting them onto their teams, talking with them between innings. Not quite friends yet, but close enough to feel like progress. Still, the house had its own ideas about what was normal. Amanda kept hearing whispers late at night, soft giggling drifting through the walls of her room. She forced herself to ignore it. One night she thought she spotted a girl dressed all in white at the far end of the upstairs hallway, but when she went to look, there was nothing but a pile of dirty sheets piled against the wall. She was adjusting. She was managing. Petey was a different story. Their dog had been wrong ever since they arrived in Dark Falls. Nervous, snapping, impossible. They brought him to the playground every day, but they had to keep him leashed to the fence because he would bark and lunge at the other kids. Amanda kept telling Josh he would settle down. Dogs just needed time in a new place, but Petey never settled. Then, about 2 weeks after they moved in, it happened. They were finishing up a softball game with Ray and Karen Somerset and Jerry Franklin and George Carpenter and a handful of other neighborhood kids when Amanda glanced over at the fence and felt her stomach drop. The leash was empty. Petey was gone. They searched for hours, calling his name until their voices went raw, wandering block after block, checking front yards and backyards, empty lots and patches of woods. When they finally stopped to catch their breath, they realized something even worse. They were completely lost. Dark Falls had a way of doing that. Every street looked the same, lined with sprawling old brick and shingle houses, shadowed by old trees that all seemed to lean the same way. Josh slumped against a tree trunk. "I don't believe it. We're lost," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. Amanda muttered about the dog and kept scanning the street. Then the idea hit her. What if Petey had simply gone home? What if he had been waiting on the porch for hours while they wandered around like idiots? The thought lifted them both immediately. Josh pulled away from the tree. They figured out their direction, using the school as a landmark, and ran the whole way back. But when they came sprinting up the gravel driveway calling his name, their mother appeared in the doorway with dust on the knees of her jeans and a red bandana tied in her hair, and her face said everything before her mouth did. She thought Petey was with them. Josh dropped flat onto the driveway in despair. Mom and Dad did their best. Mom drove them around the neighborhood after lunch, while Josh sat in the back seat watching out the window with glassy, hopeful eyes. They found nothing, no sign of him anywhere. Dad called the police and said cheerful things about dogs having a good sense of direction, but nobody really believed it. Dinner that night was silent and heavy. Josh sat with a full plate and kept saying, almost to himself, that he had tied the leash really well. Amanda believed him. To make things worse, their parents had been invited to a potluck dinner party on the next block. Neither Mom nor Dad felt like going, but they went anyway, leaving the kids alone in the dark house with all their worry. The hours dragged. Amanda went to bed exhausted but wide awake, staring at the ceiling shadows, listening for a bark or a scratch at the door that never came. She heard the usual sounds from her room, the quiet footsteps and the soft whispering, but she wasn't afraid of them anymore. She clicked on the light. The room was empty as always, and the sounds disappeared. Then she noticed something odd. Her clothes were scattered all over the bed. Jeans, t-shirts, sweatshirts, her one dress-up skirt, all of it dumped across the mattress. Her mother was the neatest person alive. She would never have left laundry out like this. Amanda gathered everything up and put it away, telling herself Mom had probably just gotten busy and forgotten. Then she climbed back into bed and went right on not sleeping. Sometime after midnight, she heard her bedroom door creak open. Footsteps on the floorboards. She sat up fast in the dark, her heart jumping, until a hushed voice said her name. It was Josh. He was fully dressed, standing in her doorway holding a powerful halogen flashlight. He aimed it at her face by accident, temporarily blinding her. After a few apologies and some blinking, she finally heard what he had come to say. He knew where Petey was. He was going to go get him. He wanted her to come. Amanda looked at the clock. It was after midnight. She asked where, already half dreading the answer. The cemetery, why, Josh said. His eyes were dark and serious in the white beam of the flashlight. He reminded her that Petey had bolted toward that cemetery the very first day they arrived in Dark Falls. He had been looking for something there. Josh was certain he had gone back. Amanda tried to talk him out of it. She pointed out the hour, the darkness, the fact that there was no logical reason for a dog to be haunting a cemetery in the middle of the night. Josh didn't budge. He never did. She put her hands on his shoulders and felt him trembling, even as his voice stayed firm. He was going whether she came or not. She glanced over at the curtains. For just a moment, the flashlight beam seemed to catch the shape of someone standing behind them. Her heart seized up, but when she looked again, there was no one there. She thought about her room and its whispers and its impossible shadows. She thought about the empty hallway with the pile of sheets, and she decided that a strange cemetery at midnight probably wasn't any more frightening than her own bedroom. "Oh yeah, okay," she said. A few minutes later they were outside, moving through a night so still and dark it felt like the whole world had gone to sleep. There were no street lights on their block. The houses sat black and silent on either side of them. No wind, no crickets, just the sound of their footsteps crunching over dead leaves. Josh kept the flashlight aimed at the ground ahead of them as they walked toward the school. From there it was only 2 more blocks to the cemetery. Amanda kept whispering that it was too quiet, that there was something wrong with the silence. But Josh walked on without slowing. They were nearly at the school when both of them stopped at the same moment. Behind them on the pavement they heard it, scraping footsteps. Slow and deliberate, Josh lowered the flashlight. Amanda held her breath. Neither of them moved. The sounds were real. Neither of them was imagining it. Someone was following them. It was supposed to be a simple late-night search for a missing dog. But Chapter 12 had other ideas entirely. The night had already set Amanda and Josh's nerves on edge when the sound of footsteps behind them sent the flashlight tumbling from Josh's startled grip. By the time Josh recovered it, the pursuer had caught up, and the beam of light revealed not a stranger or something worse, but Ray. Just Ray, their neighbor, breathless and wild-eyed in the dark. He claimed he had trouble sleeping sometimes. His parents didn't know he was out, and when Amanda told him where they were headed, the cemetery, something shifted in Ray's voice. He told them they were not going there. He said it low and flat, like a command. Amanda felt the threat of it in her chest before her mind could make sense of it. Josh had already broken into a jog, the flashlight bouncing ahead of him, oblivious. But Amanda stood still, watching Ray's face disappear into shadow, trying to decide whether she was afraid of him or afraid for him. In the end, Ray kept pace beside her, whether out of stubbornness or something he could not bring himself to name. He followed them both through the sticky, airless night, past the dark hulk of the school, around the bend of Cemetery Drive, and through the low stone gate. All the while he begged them to stop, all the while they didn't. The cemetery opened up around them, rows of crooked gravestones leaning in the dark like tired old men. Josh swept his flashlight from stone to stone, calling Petey's name into the silence. Amanda called too, pushing away the chill that crept along the back of her neck. She told herself not to be morbid. She almost believed it. Then Josh spotted something unexpected at the far edge of the cemetery, a strange structure half buried in the earth, an amphitheater of all things, circular rows of bench seats descending into the ground like a bowl, leading down to a low platform at the bottom. It was so out of place that Amanda had to stop and stare. She asked Ray what it was, and he told her quietly that the town used it for meetings, a kind of outdoor town hall. She found it nearly impossible to believe. A town hall built into a graveyard. Before anyone could say another word, an enormous bent tree loomed over the structure. Leaning at such a low angle, it looked ready to fall at any moment, its thick roots heaving up out of the ground like knuckles. Amanda's sneaker caught one of those roots, and she went down hard, slamming her knee against the earth. She barely had time to recover before footsteps crunched somewhere behind them in the rows of graves. Josh swung the light around, and there he was, Petey standing between the gravestones, leash dragging behind him, staring back at them. Amanda turned to Josh with pure relief. She could not believe he had been right, but Petey did not run to them. He arched back on his hind legs, ears flat, eyes burning a deep and terrible red in the beam of the flashlight. He stared at the children as though he did not know them. When Josh caught him and lifted him, he immediately set him back down and stepped away. The dog smelled like death itself, like something rotting, and he walked among the gravestones with a slow, low tread that had nothing familiar in it. Amanda called his name again and again. She gave him the only command he had ever obeyed. He ignored it. He turned away from them without so much as a flicker of recognition, and then he was gone, slipping off into the dark between the stones. They chased the light back and forth across the rows, calling his name, desperate not to lose him a second time. And that was when Amanda stopped. The beam of the flashlight had come to rest on a name carved into granite, Karen Somerset. Poit a twite. Amanda read the dates twice. The girl in the stone had died at 12 years old, the same age as the Karen Amanda had been talking to on the playground every single day since they arrived. She moved the light to the next stone, and the next name she had never heard, and then George Carpenter, Torty-Toity George from the softball game. Her hand began to shake. She moved down the row. Jerry Franklin, Bill Gregory. Every child from the playground, each name carved in stone, each one with dates that ended years ago, and then the last stone in the row, Ray Thurston, Forge to Steinders to. Amanda stood in front of it and could not move. She read it again. She read it until the letters blurred and stopped making sense. The world went quiet around her, the way a room goes quiet right before something terrible happens. Ray was beside her. He had crept up while she stared, and now he stood there at the edge of the gravestone's shadow, watching her face. She moved the light over his name and the stone. She told him barely above a whisper that this one was him. His eyes caught the light and glowed like fading coals. He stepped toward her. He told her yes, it was, and then he told her he was sorry. Amanda took a step back, her sneakers sinking into the soft ground. The air was heavy and still. No one made a sound. Nothing moved. She was surrounded by death, frozen to the spot, unable to breathe. The darkness swirling around her, and the gravestones spinning in their own black shadows. One terrible question rose up inside her. What was he going to do to her? She managed to call out his name, her voice sounding faint and far away. "Fordy, are you really dead?" "I'm sorry. Fordy, I'm sorry," he said, his voice floating low and heavy on the stifling night air. "You weren't supposed to find out yet." Amanda struggled to understand, and as she searched for words, she looked past Ray to the darting white light of a flashlight. Josh was several rows away, almost to the street, still searching for Petey, and at the thought of that little dog, dread choked her throat, and her stomach tightened in horror. "Fray dogs always know," Fray said in a low, flat tone. "Flight dogs always recognize the living dead. That's why they have to go first. They always know." The words hit her like a blow. Petey was dead. Ray nodded slowly, confirming it. They killed the dogs first. Amanda screamed and took another step back, nearly losing her balance as she bumped into a low marble gravestone. She jumped away from it, her heart hammering. "You weren't supposed to see this," White Ray said, his narrow face expressionless, except for his dark eyes, which revealed real sadness. "You weren't supposed to know, not for another few weeks anyway. I'm the watcher. I was supposed to watch, to make sure you didn't see until it was time." He took a step toward her, his eyes lighting up red, burning into hers. She cried out, asking if he had been watching from the window, if he was the one who had been in her room. He nodded. "Yes, I used to live in your house," he said, taking another step closer, forcing her back against the cold marble stone. "I'm the watcher." Amanda forced herself to look away, to stop staring into those glowing eyes. She wanted to scream to Josh to run and get help, but he was too far away, and she was frozen there, frozen with fear. "We need fresh blood," Ivy Ray said. She could barely speak. What was he saying? "40 the town. It can't survive without fresh blood. None of us can. You'll understand soon, Amanda. You'll understand why we had to invite you to the house, to the dead house." In the darting, zigzagging beam of light, she could see Josh moving closer, heading their way. Run, she thought desperately. Run away fast. Get someone, get anyone. She could think the words, but she could not scream them. Ray's eyes glowed brighter. He was standing right in front of her now, his features set, hard and cold. "I messed up," he whispered. "Thymie," he whispered. "I was the watcher, but I messed up." She asked him what he was going to do. His red eyes flickered. "I'm really sorry." He started to raise himself off the ground, to float over her. She felt herself start to choke. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. She opened her mouth to call out to Josh, but no sound came out. She looked down the rows of gravestones, but could not see his light anywhere. Ray floated up a little higher. He hovered over her, choking her somehow, blinding her, suffocating her. And the last thought Amanda had was the most terrifying one of all. She was dead now, too. And then, suddenly, light broke through the darkness. The halogen beam cut hard and white across Ray's face, and Josh's voice cracked with fear as he shouted into the night, asking Amanda what was happening, demanding to know what was going on. Ray shrieked and dropped back to the ground, his voice a shrill, broken whisper, begging them to turn the light off. But Josh held the beam steady, and that was all it took. The light had already done its damage. Amanda watched, breathless and trembling, as Ray's skin began to melt. His face sagged, then drooped, then fell away from his skull entirely. She could not look away. She could not move. She could only stare as the bone underneath was slowly revealed, as his eyeballs rolled silently from their sockets and dropped to the earth. Josh, frozen in horror, somehow kept the flashlight aimed and steady, and together they stared at the grinning skull that stared back at them with dark, hollow craters for eyes. Amanda cried out when Ray took a lurching step toward her. But it was not a step, it was a fall. She threw herself aside as he crumpled, as the skull cracked open against the top of a marble gravestone with a wet, sickening splat. And then Ray was nothing, a pile of bones inside a puddle of crumpled clothes, lying still on the dew-soaked grass. Josh grabbed Amanda's hand and pulled. She could not stop staring down at what remained of Ray. But then her legs were moving, and she was running hard beside her brother down the long row of graves toward the street. The flashlight beam jumped and swung against the blur of gravestones as they slipped on the soft, wet grass, gasping in the still and heavy air. They had to get to their parents. They had to get out. Amanda said so, her voice ragged and urgent, and Josh answered that their parents would never believe them, that he was not entirely sure he believed it himself. But Amanda was firm. They would drag their parents out of that house if they had to. The white beam of light pointed the way as they ran through dark, silent streets. There were no streetlights, no lit windows, no passing headlights, just darkness and the sound of their sneakers thudding hard against the pavement, and Amanda stealing glances behind them to make sure nothing was following. Nothing was. The neighborhood was still and empty and cold with quiet. She had a sharp pain in her side by the time they reached home, but she pushed through it, up the gravel driveway with its thick blanket of dead leaves, and onto the front porch. She shoved the door open, and both of them started screaming for their parents the moment they crossed the threshold. Silence answered them. They tore through the house, room by room, turning on every light they could find, calling out with voices that were shaky and raw and desperate. Their parents were not home. Josh remembered the potluck party. Could they really still be there at nearly 2 a.m? Amanda checked the clock on the mantel and felt her stomach drop. They should have been home by now. They went to the kitchen, straight to the memo pad where their parents always left notes. The pad was blank, nothing, not a single word. Josh said they had to find them. His wide eyes said the rest. Amanda caught herself before she voiced what they were both already thinking, that something might have happened, that the darkness of this town had reached their parents too. She swallowed the thought down and said nothing. Instead, she pressed her hot forehead against the cool glass of the front window and stared out into the night, telling Josh she just wanted them home, wanted them all to leave together. "What's your hurry?" a girl's voice said from behind them. Both Amanda and Josh spun around, crying out in shock. Karen Somerset stood in the center of the living room, arms folded across her chest, wearing a smile that was sad and bitter all at once. Amanda blurted out the only thing her mind could produce, that Karen was dead. Karen kept smiling. Then two more kids stepped in from the hallway. One of them clicked off the lights, saying it was too bright. They moved to stand beside Karen. Jerry Franklin appeared near the fireplace. The girl with short black hair, the one Amanda had spotted on the stairs before, drifted silently to stand beside her near the curtains. They were all there now, all the dead children, their eyes glowing dully in the dim room, all of them smiling, all of them closing in. Amanda screamed, her voice barely her own, demanding to know what they wanted, what they were going to do. Karen spoke softly. She said that they used to live in Amanda's house. George repeated it, and then Jerry added the part that made the air feel like it was being squeezed out of the room entirely. He said that now they were dead in Amanda's house. The others laughed at that, crackling, dry laughs that filled the dark room as they closed the circle tighter around Amanda and Josh. They had nowhere left to run. Amanda and Josh had backed themselves against the window as the dead children closed in, their glowing eyes cutting through the dark. Amanda heard herself say something she had not even planned, something raw and honest, telling Karen that she had seemed so nice. And Karen answered in that flat, hollow voice that carried no warmth, only the memory of warmth. She had been nice, she said, until she moved here. They all had been, but now they were dead. Josh begged them to stop, raising his hands like a child trying to hold back the tide. The dead children only laughed, that dry and horrible laughter, with no joy in it at all. Karen turned to Amanda almost gently and told her not to be frightened. Soon she would be with them. That was why they had been invited to the dead house, the house where every newcomer to Dark Falls lived out their last days among the living. Once every year someone new had to come. Other years it had been Karen and Jerry and George. This year it was Amanda and Josh. Jerry Franklin stepped closer, his eyes burning red, and said the words that made everything terribly clear. They needed new blood. Once a year it was always the same. Amanda shut her eyes. She drew in a breath that felt like it might be her last. And then someone knocked on the door. The sound cracked through the dark like a stone through glass, loud and repeated and magnificently ordinary. Amanda opened her eyes. The ghostly children were simply gone. The air smelled sour where they had stood. She and Josh stared at one another in stunned silence as the knocking came again. Josh recognized the sound before his mind could catch up with it. He cried out that it was their parents, and they both ran. Josh stumbled over the coffee table in the dark, so Amanda reached the door first, throwing it open with her arms already reaching out for her mother and father. She stopped cold. Her arms hung in the air, standing on the porch, his face tight with worry, was Mr. Dawes. In that suspended moment, relief crashed over Amanda so hard it brought tears to her eyes. She pushed the screen door open for him, and Josh rushed up beside her, and Mr. Dawes grabbed Amanda by the arm and told them there was no time to talk. His car was in the driveway, the engine running, only the parking lights on. They had to go right now. Amanda and Josh hesitated. The same fear pressed down on both of them at once. What if Mr. Dawes was one of them? But then Mr. Dawes told them what had happened at the party. He had been with their parents when, without warning, everyone in the room had formed a circle and begun closing in, just like the dead children had closed in on Amanda and Josh. He said the three of them had broken through and run, and that their parents were safe for now, hidden near the outdoor theater by the cemetery. He told them to hurry. They followed him to the car. The clouds had parted, and a thin sliver of moon hung low in a pale early morning sky. Mr. Dawes held the door for Amanda. Josh climbed in the back, and they pulled away fast, tires sliding and squealing against the road. Mr. Dawes pressed down hard on the gas and stared straight ahead, jaw tight, eyes narrow. Amanda watched the purple darkness outside her window as a low orange sun began to rise above the green treetops, and she felt something loosen in her chest for the first time in hours. He told them where the parents were, an outdoor amphitheater, built right into the ground, hidden by a large tree beside the cemetery. He had told them not to move, and he believed they would be safe there. Mr. Dawes pulled the car to the side of the road at the cemetery's edge. They all climbed out into the violet-streaked morning. The dark outline of the leaning tree was visible across the jagged rows of gravestones. Mr. Dawes urged them to hurry, saying he was sure their parents were desperate to see them. Then Josh stopped. There, moving slowly along the slope of the graves, was their white terrier, Petey. Josh called out and started running before Amanda could stop him. Her heart dropped. She had not yet told Josh what Ray had said about Petey. She ran after him, shouting his name, shouting at him to stop, finally calling out the words she had been dreading to say. Petey was dead, but Josh kept running. The dog moved along, sniffing at the ground, not looking up, not responding. Then Josh's foot caught the edge of a low grave marker, and he went down hard, the flashlight flying from his hand and clattering against a stone. Amanda reached him and grabbed his shoulders, asking if he was all right. But Josh did not answer. He lay on his stomach, perfectly still, staring straight ahead with wide-open eyes. She shook him, and finally he spoke in a voice that was almost a whisper. He said to look. He pointed at the gravestone he had tripped over. Amanda turned and read the inscription in the dim morning light, mouthing the words silently as her head began to spin. Compton Dawes, rest in peace. Pooty to find in. Mr. Dawes had told them he was the only Compton in his family. Not his father, not his grandfather. Him, Mr. Dawes, was dead. Dead like Karen, dead like George, dead like all of them. He had never been their rescuer. He had been leading them exactly where they were meant to go. Amanda and Josh stared at one another in the purple morning dark, surrounded on all sides by the quiet graves, and the question that pressed down on both of them had no answer yet. Now what? Get up, Josh. We have got to get away from here. Those words barely escaped Amanda's lips before the chance to run was stolen from her entirely. A hand closed around her shoulder like a vice, and she spun around to find Mr. Dawes standing there, his eyes narrowing as they moved over the inscription carved into his own gravestone. The sight of it confirmed everything. He was one of them. Mr. Dawes, you too, she cried, her voice breaking under the weight of disappointment and confusion and pure, cold fear. Almost sadly he confirmed it. All of them, he said. And then he told her the truth about Dark Falls. It had been a normal town once, filled with normal people, most of them working at the plastics factory on the outskirts. Then came the accident. Something escaped. A yellow gas drifted over the town so fast, so silently, that no one saw it coming. And by the time they realized what had happened, it was already too late. Dark Falls had become something else entirely. Every one of its residents was dead and buried, but unable to rest, unable to sleep, a town of the living dead. Amanda's knees trembled so hard she could barely hold herself upright. A dead man had his hand locked on her shoulder. A dead man's sour breath choked her nostrils as he stared hard into her eyes. Josh climbed to his feet and glared at Mr. Dawes with a fierce, accusing look. "Where are Mum and Dad?" he demanded. Safe and sound, Mr. Dawes replied with a faint smile. He told them it was time to join their parents. Amanda yanked against his grip. "Let go!" she shouted. But his hand did not move. "It does not hurt to die," he said softly, his voice almost soothing. "Come with me." Then Josh moved. With sudden quickness he dropped to the ground and snatched up his flashlight. Amanda understood immediately. The light had defeated Ray. The light could destroy Mr. Dawes too. "Shine it on him, Josh," she pleaded. "Quick, shine it on him." Josh fumbled with the flashlight, aimed it at Mr. Dawes' startled face, and clicked it on. Nothing happened. No beam, no blinding flash, just darkness. "It is broken," Josh said quietly. He guessed it must have happened when it struck the gravestone. Amanda looked back at Mr. Dawes. His smile had changed. It was no longer faint or sad. It was the wide, certain smile of a man who had already won. "Nice try," Mr. Dawes had said, but the smile dropped from his face almost as fast as the words left his mouth. Up close, he did not look so young or handsome anymore. His skin was dry and peeling, hanging loosely beneath his eyes like something that had already started to give up. He shoved the narrator forward and glanced up at the brightening sky, where the sun was pulling itself over the tops of the trees. Time was thinning out, and everyone in that cemetery could feel it. Josh hesitated for just a moment too long. Mr. Dawes snapped at him, stepping forward with a menace that made the air feel cold. Then Josh did something desperate and brave. He pulled his arm back and hurled the flashlight straight at Mr. Dawes' head. It hit with a sickening crack, right in the center of his forehead, splitting the skin open and revealing a wide hole beneath. Grey skull poked through. Mr. Dawes let out a low cry, his eyes wide with something that looked almost like surprise, and reached up to touch the wound with trembling fingers. The narrator screamed at Josh to run, but Josh was already gone, zigzagging wildly between the rows of graves with his head ducked low. The narrator sprinted after him, pushing legs harder than they had ever been pushed before. Glancing back, the narrator saw Mr. Dawes stagger a few steps in pursuit. Then he stopped. He stood completely still, staring up at the brightening sky with a scowl twisting his ruined face. It was too bright for him. The sunlight was his enemy, and he knew it. He turned and headed back toward the amphitheater, keeping carefully to the shadows along the tree line. Josh and the narrator collapsed behind a tall tilted marble monument, gasping for breath, pressing their backs against the cool stone. When they finally worked up the courage to peer around the sides of the monument, Mr. Dawes had already disappeared behind the great leaning tree. He was not chasing them anymore. He was going back, and they both knew exactly why. He was going to get Mom and Dad before either of them could even form a plan. Something else caught their eyes. Dark figures were moving through the cemetery, appearing from out of nowhere, seeming almost to rise from the ground itself. They walked quickly, nearly floating over the green, sloping grass, all heading in the same direction. Their eyes were fixed straight ahead. They did not speak to one another. They moved with a terrible puppet-like purpose, drawn toward the hidden amphitheater, as if pulled by invisible strings. Josh pressed close to the monument and whispered in a trembling voice. There were so many of them. The narrator pointed out Karen and George and all the kids from the house, moving in twos and threes among the other shadows, just as silent and businesslike as everyone else. The whole town seemed to be here, everyone except Josh and the narrator. And Ray. Ray was not there either, because they had killed Ray. They had killed someone who was already dead, and that thought sat heavy in the narrator's chest like a stone. Once the last dark figure disappeared past the leaning tree, the cemetery went perfectly still. A single crow drifted high above in a clear, cloudless sky, the only living thing willing to move. Slowly, keeping low, ducking behind gravestones, Josh and the narrator crept toward the amphitheater. Every step felt like wading through something thick and invisible. The narrator later thought of it as the weight of fear, pressing down from all directions, making 500 pounds out of two ordinary kids. The desperate need to find Mom and Dad pulled them forward. The terror of what they might find held them back. Both feelings were true at the same time. They reached the enormous leaning tree and crouched behind its massive clump of upraised roots. From below, they could hear the low murmur of voices rising out of the shadows. Josh started to lean around the tree trunk to look, but the narrator pulled him back. Whatever was down there was practically right beneath their feet. They both leaned over the top of the trunk, slowly and carefully, and then they saw them. Mom and Dad were tied up back to back, standing in the center of the amphitheater floor in front of everyone. Their arms were bound tightly at their side. Dad's face was a deep, frightened red. Mom's hair fell wildly over her forehead. Her head bowed as if she could no longer bear to look up. They were so clearly terrified, so helpless, and the sight of them standing there like that sent something sharp and aching straight through the narrator's chest. Mr. Dawes stood beside them, along with another older man. Every single bench in the amphitheater was filled. Not one empty space. The whole town, it seemed, had gathered to witness whatever was about to happen. Josh grabbed the narrator's arm and squeezed hard. They were going to turn Mom and Dad into one of them, and after that, they would come for Josh and the narrator too. There was a moment, just a breath, where the narrator stared through the shadows and felt completely blank. Then something clicked. An idea arrived so suddenly and so clearly that it did not even feel like thinking. It felt like knowing. The tree, the great tilting, half-fallen tree, with its roots already pulling free from the earth. If they could push it over, sunlight would flood the amphitheater. Beautiful, golden, deadly sunlight. The dead would crumble. Mom and Dad would be free. Josh's face lit up immediately. He knew it could work. The tree was barely standing as it was, but there was no time left to think about it. Peering over the trunk one more time, the narrator could see that everyone in the theater had risen to their feet. They were all moving forward, closing in on Mom and Dad. The narrator and Josh stepped back just enough to get a running start. One hard push. That was all it was supposed to take. They looked at each other, and something passed between them that did not need any words at all. They ran. They hit the tree with everything they had, driving their hands into the bark, leaning their shoulders into the trunk, pushing with every ounce of strength in their bodies, pushing and pushing and pushing some more. The tree did not move. Push, push it again. Amanda's desperate cry rang out across the hillside as she and Josh hurled themselves against the old tree trunk with every ounce of strength they had left. This was the moment everything came down to. One tree, one chance, and the voices rising from below told them they were running out of time. Josh groaned and staggered back, his face red, his muscles shaking. He told her he couldn't do it, that it simply wouldn't move. But Amanda wasn't ready to give up. She glared at him until he backed up and tried again. Together they crashed into the trunk, shoulders first, grunting and straining, the veins at Amanda's temples burning like they might burst. The tree gave a little, just a little. Then it bounced right back. Amanda slumped forward in defeat, her face dropping into her hands. She was so disappointed, so frustrated, so terrified. She could barely breathe. And then she heard it, a soft cracking sound, barely there at first, like a whisper in the wood, then louder, louder still, until it became a rumble, then a roar, as if the earth itself were tearing open. The old tree fell fast. It didn't have far to go, but when it hit the ground, it struck with a thundering crash that shook the world around them, and brilliant sunlight came pouring into the amphitheater like a flood. The screaming started immediately. Horrified cries, angry cries, frantic, desperate cries that twisted into howls of pure agony. The living dead, caught in the golden light, began scrambling over one another, screeching and clawing and climbing, fighting for any shadow they could reach, but there was none left to find. Amanda and Josh stood frozen in amazement as the impossible unfolded before them. Skin began dropping from bones. Bodies crumbled to powder and dissolved into the ground, clothes disintegrating right along with them. The cries rang on as flesh melted, dry bones collapsed, and what had once been an entire town fell apart in the warm, clear sunlight. Amanda watched Karen Somerset stagger across the floor of the amphitheater. She watched Karen's hair fall from her head in a heap, revealing the dark skull beneath. Karen looked up at her, one last long look, filled with something that could only be called regret. Then her eyeballs rolled from their sockets, and she opened her toothless mouth and called out something that cut right through the horror of it all. Thank you, Amanda, thank you." And then she was gone. Amanda and Josh pressed their hands over their ears and looked away. They could not watch an entire town crumble to nothing. When they finally turned back, the amphitheater was silent and empty. Every last one of them had vanished. And standing right where they had been, tied back to back, were Mom and Dad, their faces wearing the most extraordinary mixture of horror and disbelief Amanda had ever seen. She would never forget their smiles as she and Josh ran forward to free them. It didn't take their parents long to make a decision. They packed up quickly, arranged for movers, and headed back to the old neighborhood and the old house that, lucky for them, had never sold. Dad backed down the driveway and gunned the engine, ready to leave it all behind. But Amanda suddenly called out for him to stop. She wasn't sure why. Something pulled at her, a sudden, powerful urge to take one last look at the place that had nearly swallowed them whole. She climbed out and jogged back to the yard. Standing in the middle of the overgrown lawn, she stared up at the house, silent, empty, still wrapped in its thick, clinging layers of blue-gray shadow. She stared and stared, pulled into some strange stillness she couldn't quite explain. The crunch of tires on gravel snapped her back. A red station wagon had pulled into the driveway. Two boys about Josh's age jumped out, followed by their parents. They were all staring up at the house and hadn't noticed Amanda yet. The mother smiled and told her boys they had arrived at their new home. One of the boys said it didn't look new. It looked old. Then the other one spotted Amanda and demanded to know who she was. The whole family turned to stare at her. Amanda fumbled for words. Her father's horn was already honking impatiently down on the street. She told them she used to live in their house. Then she turned and ran. As she sprinted for the car, she caught a glimpse, just a glimpse, of a dark figure standing on the porch, clipboard in hand. She thought for one awful moment that it was Mr. Dawes, but it couldn't be. It just couldn't be. Amanda did not look back. She threw herself into the car, slammed the door, and they sped away into the light.